With the best brand of football in Idaho, this is the 8-Man Prepcast on IdahoSports.com.
That's right. Welcome into another season of the Idaho 8-Man Prepcast here on IdahoSports.com. Far and away, our most popular Prepcast of all the ones we did last year was the Idaho 8-Man Prepcast.
Really?
Yes, 100%. Our viewer and listener numbers through the roof for this. The 8-Man fans come out strong, and so we wanted to get back on the horse and bring you Season 2, Episode 1. Welcome in. Brandon Baney, joined by, I'm not going to call you Mr. Idaho 8-Man, but you are a really good source for Idaho 8-Man athletics, and that's Will Hoenike. Will, welcome back.
I fake it well. I rely on people who know a lot more than me to kind of inform me on some stuff, and then I just regurgitate a lot of it. So thank you. It's good to be back.
Definitely. So most of our fans are diehards and they know the drill, but we might have some new listeners or viewers along the way. So let me quickly explain what it is that we do here each and every week and how you can get this content. So this is your weekly stop for 8-man football. That's all we're going to talk about. 1A D1, 1A D2, that's it. A lot of times the smaller schools, the 1A schools, kind of get overshadowed by the 5As, the 4As, and even the 3As sometimes. And so we want to shine that spotlight only on those 8-man schools because there's a lot of good football and there's a lot of great athletes. Will, I know the cliche example we always give is, Leighton Vander Esch, right? From Salmon River, now in the NFL, playing for the Dallas Cowboys. But there are a multitude of great 8-man athletes year in, year out that play football.
Yeah, Matt Paradis, the offensive lineman. I believe he's in Carolina now. He's a council guy. A former Notice student athlete, Chris Horn, played with the Kansas City Chiefs. Horseshoe Bend's Quade Renfro is down at Idaho State right now. Ed Becker is up from Genesee. He's up playing at the University of Idaho. There's no shortage, and there's a ton. You get into some of those smaller colleges, the College of Idaho, some of the Montana schools like Rocky Mountain and Montana Tech, Eastern Oregon. You'll find a lot of guys who played at this 8-man level and are having some good success.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is your breakdown of 8-man football week in, week out. There are a number of different ways for you to consume this content. There are audio-only options. If you go to IdahoSports.com, across the top of the homepage, you'll see schedules and scores and game streams, and those are all great things to click on as well. You definitely should. But what you're looking for in this case is Prepcasts. And from there, it's across the top of the homepage. You'll see a drop-down menu with all of the different Prepcasts that we offer. You'll click on Idaho 8-Man Prepcast. It'll take you to the page, and you can start playing the episode right there. You can also download this podcast whatever podcast catcher you use, whether that's Google, Apple, Spotify, etc. And if you're going to go that route, that's what I do, Will. I download the podcast every week and go back and listen. Any good player goes back and watches the film, so to speak. I just subscribe. If you subscribe to the Idaho 8-Man podcast or Prepcast, then it automatically gets downloaded for you each week. That's one less thing you've got to do. You don't have to go out and search for it. You'll wake up one morning and magically it'll be there. So those are the audio ways you can get this Prepcast. If you want to take the plunge and see what we look like, you can also watch the video version of this on the
Glutton for punishment right there.
Yeah, right. If you want to see a couple of pasty, pale-skinned guys talking about Idaho 8-Man football, then you should definitely check out the video version of this on the IdahoSports.com YouTube channel or our Facebook page. So we'll probably rehash that a couple of times just as we get the season going, and then maybe in September we'll just get right into talking X's and O's. So let's for this episode, we're not going to drill down too specifically because, for week 0 now, when I played high school football, there wasn't really a week 0, Will. It wasn't. Everybody kind of started on the same weekend, and now we're getting more and more games and teams that are pushing out to week 0, but no 8-man games this week. So we're just going to talk about kind of generally the landscape of what's going on in 8-man football. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds good. Let's go.
All right. So you run the Idaho 8-Man Twitter account, and I'll be honest, every time I look at it, the image you've chosen. It's a face mask, right? Like a football
Yes.
face mask.
Yep.
I'll be honest. For the longest time, I thought it was like a volleyball, and I was like, "Oh man, this guy's like okay." That's what I thought.
Wow. I may need to rethink that now. Because now I'm going to look at it and I'm going to see a volleyball. Okay.
I've ruined that for no. It's been that way for so long. I think you're good. That was just me as an outsider. So for those that don't know, I grew up in Montana originally. They have 8-man football in Montana, and they even take it a step further. Will, they've got 6-man football in Montana for those really tiny schools where basically everybody's eligible. The center snaps the ball, and he can go run out into the pattern if he wants to and go catch a pass. That doesn't happen too often, but it can. Will, you have been in Idaho for how long?
I moved to Idaho for the first time in 1997, but I'm from Spokane, so right there on that border. I used to go to high school games in Wallace and Mullen and Kellogg and Moscow, and so I'm, going all the way back into my high school days. Even before high school, I was very aware of what's going on panhandle wise.
Definitely. So Will has been around for a while in Idaho, and he knows the landscape a lot better than I, which is why I brought him on. So by proxy, I sound smart and intelligent when I'm talking about these things. So, but you run the Idaho 8-man Twitter account, and if you aren't following that, you should go follow that right now, because Will always hands out his 3 stars, the 3 top performers from the weekend, and you always have a great honorable mention list as well. Basically, any athlete that deserves to get some credit shown on them does throughout the course of the season. You do a great job with that. So, but you tweeted last week on that account that, as you were talking, we've been doing our statewide previews once again for every football team in the state, and 5A through 2A are all finished. We're still waiting on a couple of 1A coaches, but those by this time next week, or by early next week, those will all be finished as well. So, but as you have been reaching out, you're right, fingers crossed. I'll definitely help you out with that if you need some assistance. Will's been handling all of our 1A previews. As you've been talking to all of these coaches around the state, a couple of big themes have emerged. Mm-hmm. You outlined 3 of them. And the first one is, a longtime coach up north in the White Pine League, 1A D1, has left. Prairie, Ryan Hasselstrom, retired as coach there. He had 2 different stints leading Prairie, and then he's also been an assistant coach. I think you add it all up, and it's 24, 25 years total with Prairie, something like that. So he's gone. And in his place steps a new coach in TT Kane.
And TT's he's a new coach to Prairie as far as being a head coach. He's been an assistant there the last year or 2, I believe. But before that, he was in Chalice and led some successful teams in Chalice. So, I feel like Prairie got a pretty good head coach to come in. But in talking to some other coaches from around the state in the Division I level, the general theme is, let's not kid ourselves. Losing Hasselstrom is going to hurt. It's going to hurt them. It's always hard to be the guy that follows the guy. Think Bill Guthridge following Dean Smith. It's you've got that permanent bar up here that you're chasing. And in Prairie, they've been so good for so long. Now Coach Kane has a chance to come in and put his own stamp on it. And do it, if there are tweaks that he wants to make, changes that he wants to make, or if he just wants to kind of, I've got the keys to a pretty dang nice car, so I'm just going to keep driving it. And based on, he's got Tanner Ross and Hayden Eulencott as assistants, and they're both Hasselstrom players. The change this year is going to be, for the first time in a long time, Prairie on paper doesn't really seem to have a dude coming back. There's no Brody Hasselstrom. There's no Cole Martin. There's no Jake Bruner. You go on down the list. They've got some kids that I think can certainly be that guy. I know that a lot of people are really high on Trenton Lawrence, a senior who is going to get a crack to be that guy, that every down running back that is, getting 15, 20 carries a game. Colton McElroy, you've got some other guys that have been involved kind of on the periphery, and now it's their chance to step forward. And, I still expect them to be a very good team. I would be frankly, pretty shocked if they didn't win 6, 7, 8 games and play well into November. But it's definitely going to be different. It's going to be different, and this is one that we may have to check on again in 3 years and in 5 years and just see how that evolution works in Cottonwood.
Yeah, so Ryan Hasselstrom retired as coach because his son, Brody Hasselstrom, the great All-State running back, graduated, now playing for the College of Idaho, right? Did I get that right? Where's he playing at?
It's either College of Idaho or Eastern Oregon. I'd have to look.
Oh, it is Eastern Oregon. I know those were the two he was juggling. Yes, Eastern Oregon. You're correct, Will. See, this is why I bring you on. So, yes.
That I sounded wishy-washy, too.
So Ryan wants to watch Brody a little more. And, I read an article in the Lewiston Tribune from this past spring when Ryan stepped down as well. And he said, I'm finally going to be able to go hunting in the fall as well, which is nice. I haven't been able to do that for a minute. So,
yeah. And that's what he told me. He's like, can you imagine coaching a Friday night game, back and forth, wild shootout against Lapway or Genesee or whoever. And then, I want to go watch Brody play the next morning and he's playing in Billings. So I'm having to hop in the car at 3 a.m. so I can go watch my son play. And I'm like, yeah, that'd be rough. That'd be rough. So he had told me that the timing fit for a lot of reasons. A, they had a good candidate there. And B, he has a chance to step away on his terms and let Coach Kane come in and establish what he wants to establish and keep things going.
Yeah, I think this is a slam dunk in terms of a replacement. TT Kane, who, as you said, prior head coaching experience at the 8-man level at Chalice. Chalice has been a program that's been down for the last several years. The last time Chalice was really a force, or at least a player in the 8-man landscape, was when TT Kane was coaching the Vikings. So I think it's a slam dunk hire. I think Prairie, and again, this is the Prepcast where I'll come out with my bold takes. And if I'm right, I'll take the victory lap. But if I'm wrong, and P.S., I was wrong a lot last year, I'll come back and wear it. But I think Prairie, not only 6-7 wins, like you said, I think they win the White Pine League this year. I know everybody says Lapway in the preseason is the team to beat, but I just, with Prairie, it's a program and tradition that's baked in already. And I don't see anybody that's going to beat them. Lapway was supposed to play in the 8-man classic next weekend. They dropped out. From what I heard, it was because of low numbers. Now, I don't know if that means low numbers at the start of the season, like kids that weren't going to have enough practices in, or if it's a low numbers in general. But either way, that caused me to pause for a second and say, all right, I'm going to go with Prairie.
Yeah, and the thing with Lapway is, they always have athletes, whether it's 12 or whether it's 25. They're going to have some of the best pure athletes in the state, period. And, it's like you said, it's just a volume thing with them. And, I think they'll be fine. I think, both Kamiah and Clearwater Valley have a chance to be a factor. And I wouldn't rule out Genesee with Angus Jordan coming back for his third or fourth year starting as quarterback there for Justin Podrabski at Genesee. I think they're a team that can be a factor as well. But, I can't debate you or disagree with you. I'm not going to be the least bit surprised if Prairie wins the White Pine. And, Paul Kingsbury, our boss here at Idaho Sports, he and I almost have this little joke going that people have been saying for probably 5 or 6 years now. Okay, I think this is the year that Prairie kind of levels off. I think this is the year they started to hit the plateau and come back to earth a little bit. And then they go out and, win 10 games and play in a state championship and have the 1A Division I Player of the Year, and it just they haven't hit that plateau yet. So I'm certainly not going to be the one that says this is the year it happens, because I don't think it is. And I guess it probably depends on how you're judging plateau or regression. If they go, I think they have an 8-game regular season. If they go 6-2 instead of 7-1, there might be some people out there that view that as a regression. If they're not seed 2A in the 1A Division I state playoffs, or if they're not that automatic get that automatic bye into the second round or the quarterfinals or whatever, however they label it now. Are there going to be some people who say, whoa, wait a second, maybe there might be? I don't know that that's fair. I mean, I think if you go out, especially in an eight-man setting where you're one twisted ankle away, and Prairie had that twisted ankle last year. Brody Hasselstrom missed time with an injury. They had other players who missed time with injuries, and it impacted them down the stretch, where you're always that one twisted ankle away from being a 500 team, depending on who gets that twisted ankle. So I don't know that you can look at any 6 or 7 win team that qualifies for the playoffs and says, I don't know, it wasn't as good as I thought.
Yep, definitely. And I think last year Brody missed a game. He had to have an emergency appendectomy.
I believe that is correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it might have been the playoff game, because I don't think they were beaten by Lapway in the playoffs. And I think that was the game that he missed. I'd have to go back and look it back up to refresh my memory, but I think that's the one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's just wild. You can't plan for that, obviously. And I think we both agree Prairie's going to be in a good spot. In the White Pine League, as always, is going to be a gauntlet. Prairie will play Oakley, the defending 1A D1 champ, at next week's 8-man classic.
Nothing like a soft starting point, huh?
Right. And that's going to be at Middleton on IdahoSports.com. IdahoSports.com, once again, bringing you all of the matchups from the 8-man classic. And then from there, it's 7 White Pine games, and that's their schedule. So that's the way it's going to go for Prairie. Let's stay in the White Pine League, but drop down to the 1A D2 level. You talked about our boss, your boss and mine, Paul Kingsbury. We brought him on at the start of last season to get some of his hot takes, and one hot take that he absolutely nailed. Everybody roasted him at the time for saying it, but he nailed it. Was he predicted Kendrick was going to be your 1A D2 champ last year, and he was spot on. As the Tigers, they had a couple of tests along the way, but really, throughout the course of the season, looked pretty dominant at times as well. And boy, they bring back like almost everybody.
Literally almost everyone. They graduate one senior off last year's team, and Mason Anderson was a good player. It wasn't like he was just some guy wearing a uniform on the sideline. So they're gonna feel his loss. But Ty Kep, the Hewitts, you go up and down the list. They've got their linemen back, and the games they lost last year were to Oakley and Genesee. So it wasn't like these were upstart. Whoa, where did that come from? Upsets. They were pretty good teams that were able to get Kendrick, and Kendrick gets literally almost everyone back. Zane Hobart, the head coach, is not really shy about saying we have some high expectations for ourselves, as he should. Now, when you're talking about 15, 16, 17-year-old kids, do you worry a little bit about complacency? Like, look at everything we have coming back. Maybe I don't have to work so hard. I think that that's a possibility, but I also think it's one that the coaches in Kendrick are very aware of and very sensitive to. You know what I mean? So I don't think Hobart is going to allow, and maybe they wouldn't have gone this route anyway, but I don't think Hobart is going to allow those kids to kind of sit back and look at last year's stats and look at last year's record and look at last year's trophy and say, yeah, we're going to do that a couple more times. He's going to make them come out and do the work. The talent is there. The talent is unquestionably there. You talk about all the all-league and all-state kids that they have back, including Kep, the dual threat quarterback. They're going to be a really, really tough team for anybody in the 8-man ranks to handle, whether they're coming up to play a D1 team or whether it's in the White Pine League or when we get into the playoffs, when they're still playing some of the best of the best. You go back to the playoffs last year when they played a pretty darn good Horseshoe Bend team in awful conditions, and they just pounded them. I mean, 46-8, 48-8, something like that. It wasn't even an especially close game, and Horseshoe Bend was a good team. That's how good I think Kendrick can be. Now, again, we've got to put the usual caveat on there. As long as they're healthy, I think there's a very good chance that Paul can go hot take again and call Kendrick again. And I think there's a good chance he could be right.
Yeah, you talked about that Horseshoe Bend quarterfinal game, but I was just talking about this on one of the other Prepcasts we do, the Treasure Valley Prepcast with Logan Green this week, and we both kind of lamented like, there should have been a semifinal game. That shouldn't have been a quarterfinal game, and they have. We've talked to some coaches and they've told us they've kind of fixed the bracketing this year at the 1A D2 level. It's still going to be a predetermined bracket, but there's going to be, I think, some wiggle room to avoid those types of matchups we saw last year.
Yeah, I like the fact, the one that I saw that I really liked is there's now 2 teams coming out of District 1. I mean, there have been years in the past where I think you and I would agree that, Mullen St. Regis gets in and they deserve it. They're the district champ. But you know what? There's Clark Fork at 6-2 not going, while there are teams that are 3-5 that are going just because they play in a different league. And so I think that this year, especially because I think there's a chance that the North Star League could be pretty competitive. Mullen St. Regis, Clark Fork, Wallace and Lakeside are both playing in that league. And I think they'll both be pretty competitive football teams. And I think Kootenai is going to be better too. As long as they got the numbers to play. That's been kind of the gray area with them for the past several years. But they've always got players. It's just having enough of them, if you will, where I think getting a second team in there out of the North Star and balancing that out a little bit, I think that's a very good thing.
Definitely. So we'll keep an eye on that. It's a little too early to start looking at the playoff bracket it is, but we'll keep it in mind as we progress throughout the season. So speaking of, you mentioned Wallace and Lakeside dropping down. There was a couple of teams that got on elevators, right? Some moved up, some moved down. Every 2 years, the IHSAA does a reclassification cycle with a little caveat this time around. For the first time, the IHSAA said you could petition to play down a level in football only if you felt, well, I guess it was all sports, but it was mostly applied for football reasons. And so what you saw was Wallace and Lakeside are 1A D1 schools in every sport except football. They petitioned to drop down to 1A D2, not because they didn't think they couldn't be competitive at the D1 level, but because who wants to be in a 2-team league? I mean, they've done that for several years. And so they wanted to be in a more robust conference. And I like it. You also saw Castleford got moved up to 1A D1 for all sports, but they petitioned to stay down in 1A D2 and were granted that exception, which to me was surprising because they were a semifinalist team last year. And typically the IHSAA punishes those teams that do well and say, no, you're moving up. But they did allow Castleford to stay down. Valley moved down from 2A to 1A D1. So Valley is back in the 8-man game where they belong. I think most people would tell you they really struggled at the 2A level. This doesn't apply to football, but it does apply to 1A athletics. The community school, Sun Valley Community School, the Cutthroats, they jumped all the way from 1A D2 to 2A. So they're completely... Oh, wow. Yeah, they're completely out of the picture now. They were pretty decent in basketball this past year. That's where it really came into play. And then
dominant in soccer, I know that.
Yeah, they're very good in soccer. And so all of this movement is happening, but the big mover, the one that has everybody talking, is Carey making the jump from 1A D2 to 1A D1 in all sports, including football. Carey could have petitioned to stay down. I don't think they would have won, but they decided not to anyways. I think they're excited. There is a renewed excitement at Carey with this new challenge that's now in front of them.
Yeah, and they're not limping in either. Lane Kirkland, the longtime head coach. You've got the 1A Division II State Player of the Year, Connor Simpson, back. You've got Colton Larna. You've got B.J. Brown, Franco Ocampo, Tegan Kirkland, Riley Morey, Carson Perks. I mean, you've got a playoff team coming back. And the thing I think that has a lot of people particularly eyed in on this is not only are they moving up, look at the league they're moving into. They're moving into that league with Oakley, with Raft River, with Valley. That's a very good conference that they're going into, where a team could have a hell of a season and go 4-4 just based on who they play. I was talking to Lighthouse Christian head coach Jason Smith recently, and when you do conference and non-conference together, their season starts, and forgive me if I get the order wrong, but they open with Grace, playoff team last year. Okay, Carey, Raft River, Oakley, Butte County. You could go 0-5 and really not know much about your team based solely on who you're playing. You know what I mean? That's a who's who of 8-man football, and they're not all in the same conference. Grace and Butte County would be non-conference games in that setting for Lighthouse Christian. But Oakley, Raft River, and Carey, are you kidding me? That's a three-headed monster that in one league, tell me another one. Maybe you could argue the 5A SIC, but tell me another league in Idaho that has three teams like that in the same division, coming out of the same division, beating up on each other. And even the quote-unquote underbelly of that division, when you get down to teams like Murtaugh, Glens Ferry, those aren't bad football teams. That is going to be a brutal, brutal schedule where a team that loses 2 or 3 games in the regular season and gets one of those at-large bids, say they're the number 3 or number 4 at-large team to get selected, they could make a run and be playing championship weekend, and I don't think anyone should be surprised. That's how good I think that division is.
Yeah, and we saw this play out last year with Lighthouse Christian. They obviously went winless last year, 0-8. But I remember talking to you about this. We were heading into the final week of the regular season and talking about the Max Preps rankings, because 1A D1 seeds and selects their playoff teams based upon the Max Preps ranking system. And we talked about how Lighthouse Christian, despite coming in with an 0-7 record, was only 2 spots away from an at-large bid. And if they had gotten a win in the last week of the season, possibly could have made the playoffs. And that speaks to the strength of their schedule. And we could see something similar this year with the team in that. Somebody has to lose in this conference. And it's not that they're a bad team. It's just that there's so many good teams that it's going to be hard to sort out for sure. With the Max Preps rankings, Will, I think everybody now kind of understands how it works. And basically, you're not going to get many points for beating up on cupcakes anymore. And so that has forced the coaches that have teams that they think can contend to go out and put together a competitive schedule. And I like it. I talked to Notice Coach Joe Woodland on an offseason Prepcast for the Treasure Valley Prepcast, and he acknowledged it. He said, look, our schedule wasn't good enough last year. And overall in our league, our schedules haven't been good enough. So you're seeing Notice now they're going to play Kendrick in a non-conference game. They are going to increase the difficulty of their schedule. You see it with Lighthouse Christian playing both Grace and Butte County. I think overall it's good for the sport because you're going to get better games.
Yeah, and you talked about District 3. I think a lot of times if we could go back through the schedules, which you can do on IdahoSports.com, a number of the District 3 teams, whether it's Idaho City, whether it's Notice, whether it's Wilder, there's been a lot of, you could argue whether it's convenience, whether it's finances or whatever. They've played a lot of non-conference games against the 1A D2 Longpin Conference, whether it's Garden Valley, whether it's Tri-Valley, whether it's Council. And what you talk about, it leads you to wonder if you start seeing fewer of those types of matchups. And I think that things like the Idaho 8-Man Classic, when people are able to watch, insert great matchup here. Like I remember a game a couple of years ago when Idaho City played Oakley. And it's like, okay, now I really have a taste of what these two teams are, because I know they're both good programs. They're both well-coached programs with good athletes, and I've seen them go nose to nose. There is now a straight line comparison to make, whereas, you might look at somebody and say, well, they just played a few, 1A D2 teams, and they could be very good 1A D2 teams that these guys are playing in the non-conference, but it doesn't necessarily give you that straight line comparison, if you will. It's not really an apples to apples when Lighthouse Christian is playing Butte County and Grace, and I'm picking this out of a hat just for the sake of doing it. I don't want anybody to read anything into it. But then say Idaho City plays Tri-Valley and Salmon River. It applies a little bit more equitably, understandably, both mathematically and for the casual fan.
Definitely. And I think coaches understand that, those programs that are rebuilding or struggling to find their footing, like a Salmon River, like a Tri-Valley, they have to fill out their schedule too. And it's okay to play a Salmon River or Tri-Valley. You can't have too many of those games on the schedule.
You can't have 3 or 4 of them. If you have one, you have one. And there are some, there are some that are almost rivalry-ish. You think about teams that have gone up and down in years past. Council used to be a very good 1A Division I program, and hell, they may be again in the future because their numbers have grown a little bit up there. Tri-Valley is another team that a lot of these schools in the Valley, here in District 3, they have a relationship with them. You know what I mean? Garden Valley is another one. Idaho City, you're just basically, it's a big hill, but where you have to take a dirt road to get across it. Yeah. You're basically on the other side of a hill from each other. Why wouldn't you play in sports? And that's when I talk about some of the convenience of things where, it only makes sense for some of these teams to play. It only makes sense for Idaho City and Garden Valley to play rather than telling Idaho City, you can't play Garden Valley. You have to go play, Clearwater Valley or Genesee or whatever. And I think that's where we're starting to see some of the meat in the middle stuff, like the Idaho 8-Man Classic, where I think it makes a lot of sense and it eases some of the burden on both sides where, okay, we might have to take a 2-hour bus ride, but we're not taking a 5-hour bus ride. We're not missing an entire day of school to go play this game, things of that nature.
Yeah, and I think the clearest point you'll see is when you look at Wilder and you look at their schedule last year compared to this year. Last year, Wilder went 5-3 and didn't make the playoffs because the league wasn't strong enough. Their non-conference wasn't strong enough. They played both Salmon River and Garden Valley last year. They have traded those games in this year for matchups against Valley and Murtaugh and Butte County. They will be hosting Butte County in a true home game. So Wilder gets it. Hey, we got to step up our game if we want to get to the playoffs. So
yeah,
I think that's
Kyle Dalsolio. He's seen it. He's been around. Yeah. He's experienced this enough on both sides where, I applaud those coaches that, and like I say, sometimes you have to take things into consideration, and I get that. But I think it's great to see these coaches say, okay, yeah, we'll go play. We'll and you've got to have the room on the calendar to do it, so to speak. But you go in and you have a week 1 opening. Okay, who's got a week 1 opening, and to not restrict it solely based on geography. I like it. It's going to get us some really interesting matchups.
Definitely. And I am also wondering if you might see more out-of-state matchups against really acclaimed 8-man teams, because Max Preps does take that into consideration. If you play like last year, Mullen St. Regis played Superior High School from Montana, which was the dominant 8-man team in that
Very
state.
Good, yeah.
That helped their ranking because Superior was good and they played a good team. Oakley went and played Pahranagat Valley in Nevada, nationally acclaimed, over 100 wins in the last 3 or 4 years or whatever it was. And
the only game they lost last year, if I'm not mistaken, was to Oakley.
Yes, that is correct. And so I wonder if we'll start to see maybe a couple of those as well. Hey, who's playing well in Nevada? Who's playing well in Montana? Who can we play and add to our schedule?
There's some hesitation. As an example, I'll use Oregon and I'll use the sport of baseball just because I know a couple of baseball coaches in Oregon that are right along the Snake River there. Like Nissa and Parma are separated by like 7 miles. They didn't play each other in baseball last year because Oregon schools got penalized for playing out-of-state games, along the lines of Max Preps, potentially dinging a team for playing, 1A D2. So Nissa had to really schedule very carefully because they felt like they had a pretty good baseball team and they didn't want to get left out of the playoffs because they played too many Idaho teams. So they only scheduled 1 or 2 Idaho teams. And, if that, if that apple falls from the same tree in terms of football, you look at a team like Adrian, which is, again, right across the river. You could probably get from Adrian to Wilder in 15 minutes, maybe. And Adrian has been, Carey light in terms of their results in recent years. So that's another one out of state. Does it make sense for some of these teams, particularly in District 3, if you're looking for a good non-conference game? I'm sure I'm not breaking any news. I'm sure that there are plenty of 1A, District 3 coaches that are like, yeah, we've tried to go down that road, and for whatever reason, it hasn't worked out. But to your point, there's another pretty good program out of state that's not very out of state for a lot of teams.
Right. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the schedules continue to evolve as we move forward. And let's get out of here on this note. A couple of programs that, in the 8-man cycle, we see teams come and go. Some years they have enough kids to compete. Some years they don't. A couple of schools that haven't been competing in the past couple of years are back trying to make a go of it. We saw last year Meadows Valley, for the first time in over 20 years, have varsity football. They played an independent schedule last year. This year, they will be a full-fledged member of the Long Pin Conference. Joining the Long Pin Conference, diving right in after not having a program for the last 2 or 3 years and becoming a full member, is Cascade. The Ramblers are putting together a Long Pin schedule, and that's exciting to see.
You'd like to, you sit here and we've seen it before with some teams that have tried to give it a go and it just hasn't worked out for whatever reason. You're pulling for them. For Cascade, you're definitely pulling for them. This is a team that won a state championship 20 years ago. And you may say, yeah, 20 years ago. It wasn't that long ago. They had some great teams in the early 2000s. And then, turnout just went down a little bit and enrollment went down a little bit. And they hit some tough times, but they're able to succeed there. They have the athletes there to succeed there. It's just a matter, and how many times have I said it just in this episode, it's just a matter of having enough of them. And as long as they have enough of them, and in particular along the lines, it's going to take a couple years because, you've got to get that IQ and experience level back up, considering the program hasn't played. I think they played 1 game in 2019 before canceling their schedule, and they haven't played since, if I think that's right. So it's going to take a little bit of time to build that experience level and that IQ level back up, but they'll get there, as long as they're able to keep a team on the field, and that is success number 1. And that was success number 1 for Meadows Valley last year. They scheduled their 6 or 7 games. They played all 6 or 7, and now they're coming back this year. And all those kids, because they've got a lot of them back. It was a lot of freshmen and sophomores last year, so they've got a lot of those kids back. They'll be much better for it this year. And they'll be playing in the Long Pin, so they'll be playing against Horseshoe Bend. They'll be playing against Tri-Valley, Garden Valley, Council. They're going to have a tough schedule. So at the end of the year, people may look at the schedule and say, oh man, they went 1-7. They weren't that much better, but you can't always grade it just by looking at a scoreboard. You have to be willing to look at the product on the field, and you have to be willing to see, okay, yeah, they went 1-7, but they were losing varsity games 50-30, whereas last year they were losing JV games 50-6. You know what I mean? You have to be willing to really look at it before you can really properly assess a program's process. And in a younger program like Meadows Valley, like Cascade now, like Greenleaf Friends in the Western Idaho Conference 1A Division I, you have to look beyond the record to really get a vibe, get a feel for how the progress is going as far as getting back on their feet.
Definitely. So we'll see how Cascade does in their first season. We're wishing them the best of luck. Tell me if I'm wrong here, because you live over in the Treasure Valley, and I live I live over in East Idaho, so I'm kind of observing from a distance. But my perception is that there's been a huge population influx to Western Idaho, right? Whether it's Boise Metro, Meridian, etc. They're all growing, and at least in my perception, that's pushing more people also to some of these, smaller communities that are around the Boise metro area where, hey, we're still only, 45 minutes to an hour away from the big city, but it's, a lot quieter, in Horseshoe Bend. It's a lot quieter in Cascade. And I think that's giving these smaller schools an influx of more people, more kids in school, and more athletes.
I've heard people speculate, and it's just that, it's speculation, that Horseshoe Bend, which is right now 1A Division II, could be 2A in 5 years because of a subdivision that's being built about 15 minutes up the road, about halfway in between Eagle and Horseshoe Bend. But no, you're right. It's a rapidly growing area, and the cost of living in Ada County, which is Boise and Meridian and Kuna, the cost of living in Ada County has spiraled upward to the point where it has pushed a lot of people out. I live in Parma, which is about an hour northwest of Boise, pretty close to Caldwell. And good luck finding if you're looking for like a rental house or you're looking for a home for under $400,000, just drive right on through Parma, because you're probably not going to find it here. And it's a residual of, all the people moving into Boise, which is pushing people into Canyon County, which is pushing people further out into Canyon County, and then ultimately up to, like you're talking about, is it Emmett? Is it Horseshoe Bend? Is it Notice? Is it Fruitland? And I think all of those communities are seeing a bit of growth, and it's a residual of all the people that are moving into Ada County.
Yep. All right. Last note here. The last time the Clark County Bobcats had a football team was 2016. They actually made the playoffs that year and lost to Dietrich in the first round. So for the first time in, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 5 years, Clark
Used
County.
all the fingers for that one, didn't you?
I did. I'm horrible at math. Okay. So for the first time in 5 years, Clark County is making a go of it. And this is one of the smallest schools, period, in Idaho, just in terms of total athletes, total students. They're doing a hybrid. They're going to play a couple of varsity teams, but they're going to play some JV teams as well. And I'm excited. Tyson Schwartz is going to be the coach. He's more of a basketball guy. He's like 6'7", but he's gonna coach him up. And I'm excited to see what happens in Du Bois this year as well.
They're looking at an enrollment of somewhere around 30 kids for the school, 9 through 12. So just playing law of averages, you're drawing from about 15-ish boys in the whole school. And that's if every single one of them turns out. And we all know that's not realistic. There's a couple kids that football just ain't going to be their thing, and that's fine. That's totally fine. I don't judge those kids, nor should anybody. But, can you imagine going into a season knowing that, okay, a good turnout for us might be 12 or 13 kids? And you talk about the potential for injury impact, but I think it's fantastic, because if you look back at some of those years, you mentioned the last year they played, they were in the playoffs. I was looking up some of their year-to-years, just kind of curious how they were going, because a lot of times you'll see when programs peter out for whatever reason, there's usually a 3 or 4 year run of no wins, 1 win. Every game is a mercy rule. And kids just kind of lose interest. They get tired of getting their teeth kicked in. So they stop playing football and they go run cross country, or they just take the fall off or whatever. Clark County, and it's not every year, but I was seeing a lot of 5-win seasons, 4-win seasons. Boy, they really hammered Team X or Team Y this year. It seems like a program where, as long as they have the bodies, and there's another thing, how often am I going to say that? It seems like athletically there are some pieces in place where, again, it might take a year or two to get the program back really, rolling again, as far as setting the expectations, getting the knowledge and the IQ. Because, you can't underestimate things like when you're starting a program and you haven't played in 4 or 5 years. So you may not have a single kid in your program who has played at the high school level, period. They may not have played at the junior high level, period. And you're teaching them things like kickoff assignments, substitution packages, coverage assignments. That takes a little bit of time. And, Cascade, Greenleaf, Meadows Valley, throw Clark County in there. I'm rooting for them. I'm rooting for them because the more teams that play, the better we all are. I genuinely believe that. And Clark County has a history of some success on the football field. They've just got to, get themselves kind of back in the groove. And I think once they get back in the groove, they'll be right back to being a competitive team in that league with, Water Springs and North Gem and Rockland. And there's a team, I think, Rockland, that has a chance to be pretty dang good this year. But, Mackey, I'd love to see, and Shoban has tried a couple of times. I'd love to see Shoban get back to a point where they can put a team consistently on the field and compete. I think it would be a lot of fun. And I think that has a chance. If you can get Clark County back to where they were, that has a chance to be a pretty good league in the 1A Division II classification.
Definitely that Rocky Mountain Conference. We'll keep an eye on it. Clark County did have a couple of players that played with West Jefferson last year, so they would drive to West J every day and play, and they obviously had a great experience. West J.
How far is that drive? You're the Eastern Idaho guy, so you tell me.
So I go by DuBois all the time because that's right off the interstate. I've never actually been to Terraton. It is, I'm going to guess it's about 45 minutes, something like that. Not too bad. So
if you want to play and that's what you got, you do it, right?
Right. That's 100%. So they had enough kids have a good experience. West J did make the 2A playoffs last year to say, hey, we can do it on our own. Clark County, I think, is on an upward trajectory right now where 3 years ago, they didn't have enough bodies for a basketball team. They had a co-ed. They had 3 girls that played boys basketball with the Clark County boys. So they had enough to have a team. They had like 7 players. I think they had 4 boys, 3 girls. They now have their own teams again. So I think there is a slight tick upward in terms of athletes at Clark County, which is exciting. So,
hey, keep that going. Everybody says, oh, you like Team X or you like Team Y. I'm going to say it right now on this webcast. I like them all. I wish Tri-Valley and Cambridge, Midvale and Cambridge had enough kids to field their own teams instead of having to co-op. I'm psyched that New Meadows is playing. I'm hopeful that Kootenai can keep it going. Some of these teams that are fighting so hard to get on the field, I want them to find success because there's just something about, and I mentioned I live in Parma, and it was touch and go as to whether or not Parma was going to have a varsity football team this spring. It looks like they will, but it was touch and go if Parma, a 3A school, was going to have enough kids to play varsity football this year. So it happens, Shoshone had to go through a little bit of a reset. Hagerman's going through a bit of a reset right now. I want them all to succeed, and I want them all to thrive because I think that nothing beats small town, small school Friday night football. And I used to work at Channel 6, one of the TV stations here in the Valley. And if you gave me a choice, and I don't mean this disrespectfully to the athletes at the 5A schools in general, but if you gave me a choice between going to a game at Eagle or going to a game at Bronco Stadium, which is where the 5A Metro schools played at the time, or going at BK, or I could go to a game at Notice, I like the vibe of the small town more. I always have. And that's part of why Idaho 8-Man came to be, because that's what I enjoyed personally. That's what I enjoy. And I found that media coverage, that's where they were cutting. They weren't cutting from the Rocky Mountains. They weren't cutting from the mountain views. They were cutting from the Notices and the Wilders. So if me sharing links and sharing tidbits and telling stories and showing pictures and mentioning athletes, if I can help replace even just a tiny bit of that coverage that some of these schools have lost over the years, then I'll do this as long as I can do it.
Well said, Will. Absolutely. And more opportunities for more kids is what I want. So
Yes,
all these schools, Hagerman, you did mention they've been kind of doing the hybrid schedule for a couple years. They are intending to compete as a full member of the
awesome. That's great.
Sawtooth Conference. It's going to be Hagerman, Dietrich, Camas County, Castle Ford, and Shoshone. I think I might be missing one, but it's going to be a good little D2 league.
That's an interesting.
sure.
Hanson, did you mention Hanson?
Oh, and Hanson. Yes, there's 6 of them. Yep.
That's an interesting conference because you got some real potential in there, and I mean, we could veer down into the weeds of every conference if we wanted to, but. Camas County returns some good kids. Dietrich returns some good kids. We know Castleford does. Hagerman has won state championships before, so they've got some pedigree. Down in that town, Hanson. That could be a fun league to watch as well.
Definitely. We're going to get into the weeds next week with kind of looking at every conference and kind of picking a couple of things. And of course, we'll highlight the opening weekend of games as well next week, including the Idaho 8-Man Classic at Middleton High School, which again, IdahoSports.com will be bringing you live coverage of for every single contest there. All right. 1 down and about 14 more to go here as we make the march towards November. Well, we're very happy to have you back here on the Idaho 8-Man Prepcast.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you next time on IdahoSports.com.